Hello, my name is Kent Weyler, and I'll be speaking with you about hardwood production and exports. Neither Canada nor Mexico export much hardwood logs or lumber. Net of cross-border trade in 2020, the U.S. exported 13 times more than Canada and 180 times more than Mexico. Canada's biggest export market after the U.S. is China, which is also the largest market for the U.S. So I'm going to focus on U.S. hardwoods and exports. I'm also going to narrate these slides without a video insert so we can focus on the content of the slides and I won't be watching myself talk. Here is a little bit about me. My background is in the business side of forestry and the forest products industry. 4 years ago, I joined the University of Washington as an associate professor and the director of the Center for International Trade in Forest Products, or CINTRAFOR. Throughout my business career, I'd often worked with the good people at CINTRAFOR. So I was very happy and fortunate to join the organization. We're part of the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences in the College of the Environment. Our mission is predicated on two key beliefs. First, we believe that using sustainably sourced wood is good for the environment and for humanity. And second, we believe that peace is a natural effect of trade. So accordingly, we are devoted to doing research and education that supports and promotes the use and trade of sustainably produced forest products. Today I'll be speaking about U.S. hardwood lumber exports. While you probably know this, let's cover a few basics to be sure we're on the same page. First, hardwoods come from deciduous trees. They're often higher density or hard, but not always. There are many hardwoods that are relatively soft. Hardwoods are common in both tropical and temperate regions, but with our focus on U.S. hardwoods, we'll be covering temperate hardwoods such as oak, maple, cherry, ash, poplar, walnut, alder. Hardwoods tend to be more visually appealing and are usually used in appearance applications such as furniture, flooring, cabinets, and interior decoration. They also tend to cost more. Softwoods come from conifer trees and are typically used in structural applications. Most of our homes in America are framed with softwood lumber, while the interiors are fitted out with hardwood products. Now that's a generalization. There are appearance applications for softwoods and structural uses for hardwoods. But it's a fair generalization. It's usually true. As you know, as a tree grows upward and outward, branches and leaves are at the top and the trunk self-prunes. Branches create knots, and knots are usually considered a defect. Wood without knots is called clear and tends to be of higher value. So as you think about how a tree grows, you can understand why a higher proportion of clear wood comes from the trunk, and larger diameter trunks will contain more clear wood. It's also important to recognize that anytime you saw a log, you're going to get some appearance grade high value wood with minimal knots and defects, but you'll also get some common or industrial grade wood that's still structurally sound, but it just doesn't look as nice. You get both. I Googled hardwood log prices, and this price list from the Northeast Timber Exchange came up. As you can see, a large diameter 16-inch prime log is worth about a third more than the 10-inch number 2 grade log, and 3 times as much as a pallet grade log, which is unlikely to have any clear lumber at all. We have 3 major wood baskets in the United States, as depicted in this graphic from the Endowment for Forestry and Communities. Notice first that the South produces more of the wood fiber we consume than the rest of the country combined. In fact, these figures are from 2016, and over the past 5 years, timber harvest volumes have shifted even more to the South, where we've added over 5 billion board feet of sawmilling capacity, while losing capacity in the West and the North. The South has a good mix of hardwoods combined with our greatest source of plantation softwood. The North and Northeast have a lot of conifer forests, but harvests in the North region are predominantly hardwoods. And the West is mostly conifer forests and softwood production. This graph shows lumber production at 10-year intervals. You can see that overall we produce more softwood than hardwood, but there are regional differences. Hardwood production exceeds softwood in the north, while the south has a good supply of both softwoods and hardwoods. And the west is almost all softwood. Notice the light blue column for 2010, which was near the depths of the housing crisis and the accompanying recession. Notice that hardwoods in all regions have not recovered to 2000 levels of production, nor has softwood in the West. This is a function of demand, not supply. Timber inventory has been growing substantially over the past 10 to 15 years. This graph from Hardwood Market Review's executive publication shows a 60-year history of hardwood lumber production in the United States. Here, what HMR calls eastern hardwoods is a combination of the north and south regions I just mentioned, and accounts for most U.S. hardwood lumber. Production peaked in 1999 at 12.6 billion board feet, but started to decline as furniture production shifted to China, and then fell off a cliff with the 2008-2009 housing crisis. The red X on the left marks a historic low point in production at the depths of the resulting recession. The recovery post-2009 was largely due to the hardwood industry's efforts to follow furniture production to China. Then we had the trade war and COVID, leading to the second red X and a new low. The orange line here is U.S. hardwood lumber exports to China. The blue line is total exports to the rest of the world. Notice the incredible growth in exports to China that occurred between 2009 and 2017. While I'm sure the U.S. hardwood industry would have preferred that furniture manufacturing hadn't moved offshore to China, the industry's ability to successfully transition to China was an amazing success story. Here's another way to look at how the industry changed and adapted over the past 20 years. In 1999, 84% of the hardwood appearance grade lumber produced was consumed domestically. As furniture manufacturing shifted overseas, the industry had to follow. Led by the American Hardwood Export Council, or AHEC, the industry spent years developing the Chinese market, educating buyers on how to get the most value from different species and grades. By 2018, more than a quarter of all grade lumber was being shipped to China. That's 1 out of every 4 appearance grade boards produced. Then in 2018 and 2019, the U.S. trade war with China destroyed about half of those gains. In 2018, the U.S. initiated a trade war with China, and in September of that year, China implemented tariffs of 5 to 10% on some wood products, among other things, in retaliation for tariffs imposed in the U.S. on Chinese merchandise. In June of the following year, the trade war escalated, resulting in an increase of those tariffs up to 25% on U.S. wood products. Tariffs had the foreseeable and expected impact, dropping log and lumber exports by half, an incredible loss of $1.5 billion in sales to China. Because China was such a big customer and there were not feasible alternative markets, inventories rose and prices dropped globally. The total global exports fell $2 billion. In 2019, U.S. hardwood lumber exports were the lowest point since 2013. As I said, there were no alternative markets. China was just too big. In 2017, it was 54% of volume and 57% of value of hardwood exports. Vietnam picked up a little as Chinese furniture makers shifted south across the border. But Vietnam is a very different type of buyer. It's like China was in the early days, with emphasis on the lowest price grades and species. Notice that in the chart on the left, Vietnam, Canada, and Mexico have higher share of volume than of value on the right, while Europe and China have a lower percent of volume but a higher percent of value. And that's because China and Europe were buying higher value grades. To put this in perspective, the sales lost in China are nearly equal to a complete loss of all U.S. log and lumber sales to Mexico, Japan, Vietnam, and Western Europe combined. Naturally, inventories of grade lumber grew and prices dropped 20 to 35% on all sales, not just those to China. Hardwood lumber producers lost both volume and value. Ironically, prices for pallet stock increased because the U.S. domestic demand was still there for lower value grades, but appearance grade and utility come out of the same log. So ironically, in the U.S. we had an oversupply of appearance grade lumber and a shortage of utility grades for pallets. As mills cut back on appearance grade production, supply of pallet stock declined and prices for lower quality grades rose. The U.S. lost hard-won market share in China that will be difficult to regain. Customers there had to look elsewhere and develop alternatives. Many of the new sources are unlikely sustainable supply like the U.S., so in a way the global environment loses also. That loss of market share is also unfortunate because most of the lumber going to China was staying there for domestic furniture and interior decoration. When the U.S. first started supplying China, 85% of the wood came back to America in the form of value-added products like furniture, cabinets, and flooring. But by 2016, 80% of it was being consumed domestically in China. $28 billion in relief was given to American farmers, who definitely needed it, but none of that was shared with the hardwood industry. What happened to the U.S. industry is, to put it mildly, regrettable. The U.S. was 10 years into the longest economic expansion in history. 2018 and 2019 should have seen more growth. What had been achieved in China was an impressive marketing success story. But instead, we got a trade war, and when that end was in sight, COVID struck. After 2018 and 2019, the hardwood industry was reeling, and COVID was a vicious blow, dropping production 26% to the worst year of production ever. So the past 2 to 3 years have been extremely challenging for the hardwood industry, eroding supply capability. If there's a bright side, it is that the trees kept growing. So we have the resource, we just need the market demand to return. And that's going to be driven by exports. We simply no longer have the manufacturing capacity in the U.S. With robotics and automation, I'm hopeful that some secondary manufacturing will come back, but it will be slow and relatively small. A robust export trade in appearance grades will keep the industry healthy, so let's hope exports do bounce back. Unfortunately, so far we're not seeing it. In some cases the problem's the lack of demand, but mostly the problems are with supply chain issues. Not timber availability, we have the resource, but getting manufacturing capacity back up and running. This is monthly exports over the past 3 years. Total exports have ticked up slightly from this time a year ago, but remain down considerably from 2017 levels. On the bright side, volume in March 2021 was the best since October 2019, and that was with 12% higher prices. The absence of export recovery is largely because exports to China remain flat and at half of what they were in 2017. Last year, around this time, we were optimistic that Chinese buyers were returning, but it was only a 2-month spurt and then dropped back. Exports to Vietnam grew a little, but mostly lower value species and grades. Exports to Vietnam have been particularly disappointing considering the growth in U.S. furniture imports from that country. Last year, Vietnam surpassed China to become America's largest supplier of furniture. This graph is monthly imports by the U.S. of wood furniture from Vietnam, but on an annual basis, U.S. imports nearly doubled, up 89%, from $4 billion in 2017 to $7.5 billion in 2020. On the other hand, Vietnam's hardwood lumber imports from the United States over that same time period grew only 19%. So in summary, in 2020, the U.S. imported $7.5 billion of wood furniture from Vietnam, while Vietnam imported just $223 million worth of U.S. hardwood lumber. That's less than 3% of the value of the furniture. As noted earlier, the U.S. hardwood industry is concentrated in the East, but since I'm from Washington, I'll touch briefly on Western hardwood lumber, which is mostly alder. Hardwood lumber in the West suffered the same as Eastern hardwoods. The combination of the trade war and COVID took a toll on production and exports. And as we've seen with Eastern hardwoods, alder exports have seen little evidence of recovery. There are several reasons for this lackluster recovery of export volume. Demand is good, but the supply chain got plugged up and is struggling to catch up. As you know, after shutting down at the onset of COVID, mills have struggled to get people back to work. The labor shortage has affected log supply and finished good deliveries. There are truck and container shortages. Just-in-time inventories were depleted and have been unable to rebuild. Prices for softwood lumber are so high that some hardwood mills shifted to cutting softwoods. Sawmills are having a particularly difficult time arranging transportation, and costs have soared. In addition to underutilization of capacity, the hardwood industry also experienced a loss of manufacturing capacity. For example, in October 2019, Northwest Hardwoods closed their mill in Mount Vernon, Washington, blaming the trade war with China. So now instead of 6 alder sawmills in the west, we have 5. Similar closures reduced capacity in the east also. To close on a positive note, I'll share one more graph from HMR Executive. And as they point out here, sawmill production and manufacturing have a history of bouncing back after external shocks. The current supply chain problems we face are a result of a very unusual year in 2020. They're temporary, and we will see improvement over the coming months. I'll end with that and hope some of this information has been useful. If you have any questions or would like to discuss any of these topics further, please contact me at kweiler@uw.edu. Thank you.